I never thought I'd be the target of a deranged HOA president. But here we are. My name is Michael. And until 6 months ago, I was living peacefully in my downtown apartment, focusing on my remote software engineering job and enjoying city life. That all changed when my uncle passed away and left me his house in the Pine Crest Estates community. It was a beautiful property, 3 bedrooms, a spacious yard, and quiet streets lined with mature oak trees. The only downside, the homeowners association, run by a woman named Deborah Wilkins. From the moment I moved in, something about me rubbed Deborah the wrong way. Maybe it was my age at 32. I was significantly younger than most residents. Maybe it was the fact that I drove a slightly beat-up Honda, rather than the luxury vehicles that populated most driveways. Or maybe it was simply that I hadn't earned my place in her precious community through the traditional means of a hefty mortgage and country club membership. Whatever her reasons, Deborah made it clear that I was an unwelcome addition to Pine Crest Estates. The first interaction I had with her was during my moving day. I was unloading boxes from a rental truck when she marched up my driveway in her crisp beige pantsuit, pearl necklace bouncing with each determined step. "Excuse me," she said, not bothering to introduce herself. Moving trucks are only permitted between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. On weekdays, I glanced at my watch. It was 4:30 on a Saturday before I could respond. She thrust a copy of the HOA bylaws into my hands. Page 177, Section 4, Paragraph 2. I suggest you familiarize yourself with our rules before you continue to violate them. I took a deep breath and smiled politely. I'm Michael Bennett. Nice to meet you too. I'm Robert Bennett's nephew. This was his house. Her expression flickered briefly at the mention of my uncle, who I later learned had been well respected in the community. I'll make sure to review all the regulations, but I really need to finish unloading today. The truck is due back by 7. Deborah's thin lips pressed into an even thinner line. Rules are rules, Mr. Bennett. I'll overlook at this once since you're new, but the HOA takes violations very seriously with that. She pivoted on her heel and strode away, already pulling out her phone to make what I assumed was an important call about the neighborhood hoodlum who dared to move in on a Saturday afternoon. Little did I know that this encounter was just the opening salvo in what would become an increasingly hostile campaign against me. Over the next few weeks, I received violation notices for the most trivial issues. My garbage can remained at the curb for 45 minutes after collection. My grass was half an inch too tall according to someone's mysterious measuring system, and apparently the bird feeder I hung in my backyard was non-conforming. Wildlife accommodation equipment, I handled each notice with polite clients, not wanting to rock the boat in my new community. When I received an official letter about my garbage can, I made sure to wheel it back immediately after the truck passed. When the grass complaint arrived, I hired a weekly lawn service approved by the HOA, and reluctantly I removed the bird feeder, disappointing the family of cardinals that had discovered it. Throughout it all, I maintained a courteous demeanor, even when Deborah herself would slow her silver Mercedes to a crawl when passing my house, clearly inspected for any new violations. Things escalated about 2 months after I moved in. I decided to repaint my home office, which faced the street. The previous color was a dingy beige that made the room feel like a doctor's waiting room from the 1980s. I chose a soft blue-gray that would help me feel calm during long work days. I checked the HOA guidelines and confirmed that exterior colors needed approval, but interior colors were not mentioned. I spent a weekend painting, and by Sunday evening my office looked fantastic. I went to bed feeling accomplished and ready for my work. Monday morning, I was on a video call with clients when the doorbell rang incessantly, apologizing to my colleagues. I stepped away to answer it. There stood Deborah, arms crossed and face flushed. Your window is visible from the street, and that color is not on the approved exterior palette, she declared without preamble. I blinked, genuinely. Lie, confused. It's an interior wall. Deborah, the guidelines only mention exterior colors requiring approval. She scoffed as if I'd suggested the earth was flat. If it's visible from any public area, it falls under exterior appearance regulations. Page 23. Section 8. She peered past me into my home. You'll need to repaint immediately. I've already scheduled a special board meeting for this evening to discuss your violation. I felt my legendary pain beginning to fray. I'm in the middle of an important work call. Can we discuss this later? This is a priority, Mr. Bennett. The integrity of our community aesthetic is at stake. The way she said it, You'd think I'd painted a neon mural of dancing flamingos rather than a subtle blue-gray. I'll review the guidelines again and get back to you, I said firmly, starting to close the door. But right now, I need to return to my meeting. Her foot shot out, locking the door. This needs immediate attention, Deborah. I interrupted, my voice level but firm. I am working. I will address this after business hours. Please remove your foot from my doorway. Something dangerous flashed in her eyes, a look of pure affront that someone would dare set boundaries with her slowly. She withdrew her foot. The board meets at 7:00 p.m. I suggest you attend if you want any input on the repainting schedule. With that, she turned and staled down my walkway, phone already in hand. I shut the door, took a deep breath, and returned to my meeting, apologizing for the interruption that evening. I reread the entire HOA guidelines and found nothing explicitly stating that interior paint visible from outside needed approval. Nevertheless, I attended the emergency board meeting that evening, where I was treated to a 30-minute presentation by Deborah about community cohesion and property value preservation. 3 other board members sat there looking slightly uncomfortable but unwilling to contradict their fearless leader when allowed to speak. I calmly pointed out that the guidelines didn't specify interior colors visible. From outside, I also presented photos of several other homes in the community with non-beige rooms visible through windows. The board members exchanged glances, and eventually, a timid woman named Helen suggested that perhaps the guidelines should be clarified for future reference, but that my office color could remain. Deborah looked as if Helen had suggested we all dance naked in the community fountain. The meeting ended with a grudging agreement that I wouldn't have to repaint, but Deborah's glare as I left made it clear that this battle was far from over. The following week, I received notices about my mailbox being too low, the unauthorized wind chimes on my back porch which weren't visible from any public area, and the excessive number of potted plants on my front porch. I had 3. I addressed each complaint according to guidelines, but began documenting everything. I had a feeling I might need evidence of this harassment. Eventually, my instincts proved correct when mysterious things began happening around my property. First, my mailbox was knocked over, possibly by accident, though it seemed firmly embedded in the ground. Then the potted plants on my porch were tipped over soil, spilling across the wood. My garden hose was cut in 2 places each time I cleaned up the mess, replaced what needed replacing, and installed another security camera. Yes, security cameras after the mailbox incident. I invested in a comprehensive system that covered every approach to my home. They were small, discreet, and provided crystal clear footage with night vision capabilities. I didn't mention them to anyone. No HOA guidelines prohibited security devices, and I made sure they were unobtrusive. Each new incident was captured from multiple angles, though the perpetrator remained just out of frame or hidden by hoodies and hats. About 4 months after moving in, I returned home from a grocery run to find my front window shattered glass littered my living room floor, and a large rock sat among the shards. I called the police. Immediately, Officer Rodriguez arrived. Within 20 minutes, took my statement and examined the scene. Any idea who might have done this? Sir, he asked, notepad in hand. I hesitated. I've had some issues with the HOA president, but I have no proof she'd escalate to property damage. Officer Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. HOA disputes can get nasty. We see it more often than you'd think. He glanced around. Any security cameras? I nodded. Several. I'll review the footage and forward anything relevant. After he left, I swept up the glass, covered the window with plywood, and sat down at my computer. The footage was illuminating at 2:15 p.m. While I was at the grocery store, a figure in a beige pantsuit and sunglasses had walked purposefully up my driveway, looked around furtively, then hurled a rock through my front window before hurrying away toward Surprise, Deborah's house, 3 doors down. I forwarded the footage to Officer Rodriguez with a detailed email. Then I did something that might seem surprise. Rising. I waited. I didn't confront Deborah. I didn't tell any neighbors. I simply had the window replaced and went about my business as if nothing had happened. 2 weeks later, it happened again. This time it was my kitchen window while I was out for a morning run. Same mow rock through window. Same beige suited figure. Same hasty retreat toward Deborah's house. I called Officer Rodriguez directly this time and sent him the new footage again. I quietly replaced the window and waited. The 3rd time was the charm. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was supposedly at a neighborhood association meeting. Not the HOA, but a more informal community group. I had made a point of telling several chatty neighbors I'd be attending. In reality, I parked a few blocks away, walked back through a wooded area behind my house, and entered through my back door. I sat in my darkened kitchen monitoring my security feeds. Sure enough, at 7:25 p.m., Deborah appeared at the edge of my property. This time, she carried a small bag from which she removed not one, but 3 rocks of varying sizes, as she wound up for the first throw, aiming at my newly replaced kitchen window. I stepped outside, phone in hand, already on the line, with 911. "Good evening, Deborah," I called calmly. She froze mid-throw, the rock still gripped in her manicured hand. "Michael, I was just preparing to vandalize my home for the 3rd time." I asked, my voice steady. "The dispatcher would like to know if we need officers to respond immediately, or if you'll wait peacefully until they arrive." Her face contorted with rage and disbelief. "You have no proof of anything." I smiled slightly. 6 security cameras suggest otherwise, plus the matching footage from the previous 2 incidents. The officers are particularly interested in the pattern of behavior, as if on cue police lights appeared at the end of the street. Deborah dropped the rocks and made a move as if to flee. "I wouldn't," I advised. "Fleeing the scene would just add to the charges." Officer Rodriguez was among the responding officers, after reviewing my security footage on site and taking Deborah's bitter statement, in which she somehow tried to frame her actions as community protection. She was handcuffed and placed in a police car. The neighbors, many returning from the same meeting I was supposedly attending, gathered in small clusters, watching the spectacle with wide eyes and urgent whispers as Deborah was being driven away. Helen from the board hurried over to me. "Michael, I am so sorry. We had no idea she was doing this." "Didn't you?" I asked. "Mildly. She's been openly hostile since I moved in. The board has approved every punitive measure she suggested for my invented infractions. At what point did anyone consider that her behavior might be problematic?" Helen had the grace to look ashamed. "You're right. We've all been too afraid of getting on her bad side, the things she's done to people who cross her." She shuddered. Over the next few days, the story spread throughout Pine Crest Estates. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to stopped by with baked goods and apologies. I learned that Deborah had been terrorizing residents for years, having cars towed for being one in over the edge of a driveway, issuing fines for unapproved holiday decorations, even sending threatening letters to a family whose autistic child was too noisy in their own backyard. Deborah was charged with multiple counts of vandalism, trespassing, and harassment. The evidence was overwhelming, not just from my security footage, but from the testimony of other residents who came forward. Once she was arrested, she accepted a plea deal that included probation, community service, significant restitution to me and other victims, and a restraining order, preventing her from contacting me or entering Pine Crest Estates for 5 years. The HOA board, now led by Helen, underwent a complete restructuring. The draconian rules were revised, a more transparent violation process was implemented, and community input was actively sought for all major decisions. The tension that had permeated the neighborhood lifted, and people actually began socializing with their neighbors, instead of reporting them. As for me, I repainted my office a slightly brighter blue, hung up my bird feeder, and added 2 more excessive plants to my front porch. 6 months after the arrest, Pine Crest Estates held its first community block party in over a decade. I brought homemade salsa and chips as I chatted with neighbors who had become friends. Helen approached with a glass of lemonade. "You know," she said, "Deborah always claimed she was protecting property values with all her rules and enforcement. Ironically, since she's been gone, and we've created a more welcoming community, home prices have actually increased. Turns out people are willing to pay more to live somewhere. They won't be terrorized by their neighbors. Who would have thought?" I smiled, looking around at the laughing children, the relaxed adults, and the general atmosphere of goodwill. "Sometimes the best security isn't cameras or rules," I replied. "It's a community where people actually care about each other." Helen raised her glass. 2 security cameras anyway. Without them, we might never have known what was happening. I clinked my glass against hers, and to Deborah, in a way, without her, we might never have learned how much better things could be. We laughed, and I joined a group of neighbors discussing plans for a community garden in the previously unused HOA land behind my house. As the sun set over Pine Crest Estates, I felt truly at home. For the first time since moving in. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't getting someone punished. It's creating something better from the chaos they caused. Though I have to admit the security camera footage of Deborah's face when she realized she'd been caught. That was pretty satisfying too. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video with family and friends. Thank you.